Thank you so much for all of everything that you guys have done. This was super interesting, and I'm sure that our audience has a ton of questions. So let's get started. I was taking copious notes while you guys were talking, and there are clearly some serious themes. First of all, this hybrid idea that really it's not about permissioned or permissionless, but we're actually combining the two. Things are moving back and forth. Simon, you raised this at the end of your conversation. Do you have anything to add about that? And how do you think that our audience should be thinking about that?
I think it's a great topic. To be honest, I'd love to learn more about some of the things you're doing. I think those 5 requirements that I put on one of my early slides are the key tests that I end up applying as to whether or not it's workable. So, can I predict what it's going to cost? Can I predict what service levels I'm going to get? Do I have somebody to call when it goes wrong? Do I have a reasonable degree of confidence that data is properly segregated where it needs to be? Not always, but where it needs to be. Those 5 tests are the key tests. And as I'm sure you'd bear me out, that a lot of this starts to get quite specific to the specific applications. But conceptually, it's a fabulous idea. It's a fabulous idea.
Yeah, and Monica, so you're really, what you guys are building is very much in this hybrid model. Simon just pointed out sort of some of the concerns that enterprise has. Are you finding that it is difficult to satisfy those concerns when you are building in a very hybrid way, public-private, or are you coming up with, as you're building these things, are you coming up with ways to address this?
The benefit of the hybrid model is that you can partition your application so that the parts of it that you're most concerned about in terms of data privacy and being able to know that your transaction times are going to be what you need them to be, you can do that on your private blockchain side. And then when you want to go out and sell something or tokenize something or create a public attestation of like, yes, this happened, I'm raising a semaphore, all of those you can be slightly less concerned about your SLAs, for example. Although we do make certain promises about transaction times in Chainweb and the kind of transaction volume that we can do. But if you're really worried about, this needs microsecond times and I need to know that the data is replicating, that's a perfect case for having it on a permissioned blockchain.
Yeah, great. And just sticking with sort of thinking about, these permission models, enterprise, I'm curious, again, this goes to you two. What kind of consortia are you seeing being developed in this space? And really, anyone who has sort of any insight here, are you finding that, what are the most interesting consortia? What are the incentives behind these consortia? Do you think that they'll last? Or is this, I've heard consortia referred to as a bunch of companies and competitors getting together to just basically spy on each other. So is that what's happening, or are we really getting productive work out of these consortia?
Do you want me to go first?
All right. So we have a conflicting relationship with consortia because on the one hand, they show a lot of promise, but they also require people who have been competing against each other. When I say people, I mean corporations, that have been competing against each other for sometimes decades, if not hundreds of years, some of these companies. And so there's a strong disinclination to play nice with each other, even though it's often something that they all want. So we did a pilot for a consortium of healthcare companies, healthcare insurers, where they wanted to share doctor's office information. This isn't even HIPAA protected data. This is just insurance companies get fined if they don't know where their doctors are and who's taking what insurance and how many employees they have and all of this information. And right now, they each individually try to maintain this information, and they have these call centers that call the doctors, and the doctors hate it and the insurance companies hate it. And it was a perfect case for if everybody could just play nice and share their information, everybody could win. And it was a successful pilot in that it did work, and we got 5 companies to stand up and use it. And then when it went forward into who's going to maintain this, we're still on hold. So they have a lot of promise, but it's hard to get people to play nice. I'm not sure if you've seen.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And in fact, on that, if you remember this sort of solution shape slide I had at the end of my spiel, the middle category exactly falls into that space quite commonly. And I think it's worth stepping back a click and saying, the power source for change is value, and ultimately value to the end user, not value to the corporation as an objective and landing point. That's an interim state. We can debate whether or not it happens fast enough, that chain, but ultimately, I think that's a really fundamental point that says, if a group of people are working together, why would we do it? And we do it because we're frightened, maybe, but hopefully we do it because we can see around a vision that says, wow, look, there's new innovation, there's new product service, there's new opportunity here, as well as more mundane stuff, like there's a lot of efficiency gains, quite often your point about just admin. And frankly, look at the way we've automated so many processes in this world. I was telling a story to a friend the other night. If you could do a sort of spaceman in a satellite whizzing around the planet, just looking down on planet Earth, you'd be forced to think we must be crazy. I mean, we've just kind of automated in these vertical silos, and then we message between silos. We don't even do a very good job of automating within a silo. So there's a huge amount of intrinsic value, I think, in society at large for being more coherent in the way we use data. But then it starts to then click down into a consortium that says, okay, so if four of us are going to form a business, is an AI going to absolutely clean up and the three of us are going to end up being stuffed? Because guess what? That consortium probably won't work.
You're very untrustworthy.
So, well, maybe it will, actually. but my point is that, and I find myself in this conversation almost daily, I'd say right now, it is once leaders in business or enterprise and government have reached a point of maturity where they understand what the technology might enable, and that's not a trivial step, by the way, and we're in a very asymmetrical landscape there. But once you get to that point, then you can get to the point where you say, okay, well, what is the value that we're talking about across the pool, and how is it distributed? Is it asymmetrically distributed? Because it usually is. In which case, how much do we care? Because we may not care, and it's worth having that conversation very early on. I'm never going to let you win. So, well, let's all go home then. And by the way, some other group in your sector may well work it out. So I think the word incentives is a very interesting one that you coined, because it's one I see over and over again right now, and it's worth us leading the conversations very quickly with what's the value story, how's it distributed across the group, and how we're incentivized to change.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've had, especially in the technical world, we've had so much discussion around the incentives of these open, public, permissionless networks. What are the incentives? Do you use mining? Do you have validators? What do they earn? But I haven't seen as much of a story about the incentives in these consortia networks in particular. And I think that's going to be really key to figuring out how they work. Just to put in a plug, I think some economists at MIT are starting to really dig into this question. It's very much a sort of operational sort of question. Are there any examples that are really working, especially, let's say in the blockchain space, but also outside the blockchain space, where competitors have come together? The DTCC is one example, one could say, where competitors have come together, and it's really working. They're driving value. What are the best examples of this?
Well, I referenced the Risk Alliance. I actually think we're going to see a really interesting set of stories this summer. There are two use cases that are applicable across nearly 40 large insurance companies in the US. This is an example of where they have cooperated. And effectively, they've got two specific examples. One is a proof of insurance, and one's a sort of initial claim type example. They've configured a whole set of functionality now on a blockchain-based solution that each of those insurers are going to use, and they'll adopt it as a club. And it'll reduce administrative costs. It'll enhance customer service. I think it's going to be a really interesting use case or demonstrator of how that incentive can work. That the cooperation can work even between people that are intrinsically competing with each other. So I can see that coming alive this summer.
Okay, great. So insurance, everyone should take a look and watch out. So assuming that the use cases are there, we need to talk about scalability, how to make this technology actually work for many people. Dan, you were talking about the pyramid. I guess, does this pyramid, the set of technologies you described, the suite of technologies you described, does that solve all of the problems? And if you think that this design will solve the problems of basic scalability, where are we in terms of stages? Is it all implemented? Is it all working? Is it clear? We just need to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's. Where are we?
Yeah. So I don't think that those technologies that I was talking about, they're certainly not the only ones that people are working on or that will help with scalability. And one of the sets of things I didn't talk about really was this kind of hybrid model where you have layers on top of a base one, layer one chain that are more centralized, that provide things like SLAs, that provide a tech support number, that maybe allow you to revert a transaction. And you see some of this. I mean, like the simplest example is just like exchanges or payment processors like Coinbase right now, where you can make a Bitcoin payment to someone on Coinbase, and really that's just Coinbase updating some numbers in their database. It doesn't happen on the public network, so it's free. And like Coinbase can revert it if there's fraud. And so I think that's sort of another direction to go in the pyramid, which I guess is trapezoid. It's sort of a rhombus, a trapezoidal prism.
I think the MBA students would tell you not to go with trapezoid.
But you know, I do think that having the base layer be a public blockchain, and look, this is an opinion I came to sort of the hard way. I was working on private blockchains for almost 3 years, trying to make that kind of consortium model work. And one of the problems you see is that the technology can be better in almost every way, but these social problems are kind of they're almost intractable in that nobody wants to sign on to somebody else's blockchain. People, you know, they really want to like form this consortium and do a press release about it, but they don't really necessarily want to put their business critical methods on there until it's been proven out. And as a result, this like much worse technology of public blockchains than like Ethereum, absolutely worse in every way, I think is nevertheless almost inevitable to succeed. And this, you know, it could be Kadena because you got sort of the public hybrid model as well, but it could be Chainweb. But the just based on this philosophy, I don't know if people are familiar with worse is better. I think worse is better is actually the opposite of it. I think is called like the MIT approach. So maybe it's not very popular up here, but Bitcoin and Ethereum are just so bad as technologies. Like, you know, it's like people are worried about giving showing their business processes to their competitors. It's like, well, why not just put it on the public network so literally anybody can see it? But nevertheless, because it's the only one that you can't say like, oh, that, you know, like this particular bank is going to end up owning the information, or do we really want to give this kind of strategic advantage to our competitor, or just is this going to be around in a couple of years? Because it sort of, I think it scores better on those sort of weird cockroach-like qualities. You see right now, I do think you see a lot more businesses building layer 2s and often very permissioned layer 2s on top of layer one base layer. And I think, yeah, that sort of solution to scalability, I think is probably where permission blockchains are going to end up going more to that hybrid model.
Spoke about just this a couple days ago, building permission networks on top of permissionless protocols, and also this idea of owned versus unowned, right? You know, why would I want to build on your technology? Why would I want to build on something that I know is going to end up furthering your business, making you wealthier, possibly at my detriment? I'd rather build on something that is unowned, that no one really controls. So, and I think a lot of different protocols, as they are iterating, are going to have to figure out how to unown what they're working on really fast and get it to a point where it doesn't feel like there's a single company controlling it. But at the same time, there's a tension between that and SLAs and working with customers and building good UI. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this develops.
Yeah, we started off as a permission blockchain company only, and then saw that we were not getting traction in that world because people were like, oh, we don't want to use this because, you know, my competitor is going to end up owning it. So instead, going to this main street model where we've built the street and there are a bunch of storefronts and you can build your store on the street and then people can like come in and your back office stuff happens off the street and you do that on your own time, but then you provide a central place where everybody can connect to each other. We're getting much better traction with this whole public and private at the same time than we were ever getting in permission blockchain land.
So again, talking about the scalability solutions, I'm curious if they fail, if they turn out not to work, all of the things in the pyramid, maybe some of the other things that people are experimenting with. Let's just say they don't do it. They don't solve the scalability problems. Blockchains are fundamentally unscalable. What happens then? Does everyone have to go home? Is there still a role for this technology to play? How should we sort of set our expectations?
So I think what you're seeing, the applications you're seeing right now on Ethereum, for example, don't necessarily require it to scale really more than it already has. Like you're seeing some use cases, you know, and it may require some tricks in terms of just making these more efficient, like doing some trade matching off chain. But you see a lot of, and this is in sort of the broad category of like decentralized finance. Very often you have these kinds of applications that don't require very frequent updates. Like for example, one example is MakerDAO, which is like a synthetic dollar, and also a way for somebody to get leverage on Ether. chain right now. Like you've seen $400 million locked up on MakerDAO, and that's with Ethereum as it exists today, because these are very high dollar value transactions. People are willing to pay a fee for each transaction. There's not a lot of interaction with the contract. That's the kind of use case that in a future where blockchain doesn't scale, I think you'll see those kind of very high stakes decentralized finance applications being really the
But isn't that just what the investment banks are already doing?
Why would you do it?
Why would you?
Yeah, what's the value add over today?
Well, censorship resistance.
Okay.
Okay, but it still means this is a technology for the wealthy.
Yes.
This is a question that I can't answer because Chainweb already scales. We're in testnet and it already scales better
Okay,
than Ethereum does.
so your point is, hey, Neha, your question is moot. Absolutely,
Your
it
question
works.
is moot. We've already
Okay.
proved that it works.
Okay, we should all move to Chainweb. Well, that's an answer. Maybe I sort of going down this road a little bit. Kind of what I'm trying to get at is that it feels like where we are with the technology broadly is that there's a lot of different issues with scalability, with privacy, with figuring out how to structure on-chain versus off-chain. Usability, I think, is something that we haven't really talked about today, but is extraordinarily important. What happens if we can't solve these problems? What happens if they don't work? How should people be, in 2016, 2017, it was blockchain to the moon, right? It was, this is going to take over everything. Now we're here in 2019. I think this is the third time that we've had this conference, and it's a very different sort of conversation. It's a very different, everything that we talked about today had to do with value. We are not talking about things that don't have value. And we are, we're not at the point where all of those POCs in 2016 have come to fruition. So how do we think about this? How do we think about the space moving forward? What have we learned?
Joy, I'll try and be brief. My closing slide is where I start on that topic, which is I think there's a giant learning curve right now, especially outside labs and outside innovation functions in government and in corporations. So go to somebody who's running a department who's got a quarterly reporting requirement or a customer obligation of some kind and say, tell me about blockchain. And they'll go, quite often. I mean, there will be then obviously some at the other end of the spectrum. My point is there's almost a classic distribution of that expertise. And until we've got enough people at a level of maturity that are saying, okay, I can see pros and cons, and I can see why I might want to play, and crucially, I can see how I might start to play, because that's another thing we haven't talked about here is intrinsically we're talking about joining things up that are currently fragmented or joined through elastoplast and flying pigeons and stone tablets. So we're joining things up, but where do you start? Because if you try and boil an ocean preemptively, guess what? It doesn't work. So that's quite a hard exam question. It's in its own right. Once you've got to that level of a grown-up conversation, if you like, that says, yeah, I understand what this technology can do. I understand how it can work. I can understand how it can add value. I can understand who I have to compete and cooperate with at the same time, which, by the way, is every day in every business. It's not unusual, I think. Now, what should we do? And I was talking about this with my daughter. The next generations of Imagineers who are deeply tech literate, but that can then apply that and make it real, have got a playground like no other to play in, because they've got such an appalling starting position with the way we've applied technology in government and commerce so far, in my opinion.
Yeah, very true. So maybe in 2016 we underestimated the amount of learning that really needed to happen at all layers.
Right.
Dan and Monica, at closing statements, answers to the question.
To the question of which
yeah, just given where we are in 2016 now, here we are in 2019. What have we learned?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely been sobering. There's some kinds of progress that are just sort of happening more or less organically and not necessarily that related to the level of hype, which is just like steady progress on Bitcoin Core, just getting more stable. Although of course you have seen some critical 0 days on it. Just sort of progress on developer tools getting better, but also just more and more people being aware of and buying Bitcoin and Ether. I think there's most of you tune out basically all of the hype. and if you just sort of watch the progress of I think it's people talk about the crypto space goes very fast. I think it goes very slowly, and a lot of it is because people are sort of running around in circles, and there's a lot of duplicated effort. But sort of inevitably, I think you're going to see at least some of the problems just sort of solved, not even on like a 5-year time scale, but like a 20-year time scale. And so then inevitably we're going to see something sort of very profound happening, but yeah, I have no idea what it'll be. That's, if I knew what it would be, I would be go off,
Really?
building it.
Or investing in
Instead
it.
of, I guess, or investing in it. Shoot.
Monica, close us out before we move on to the break.
All right. I think I'm going to call 2019 as the year of the launch.
Oh, okay.
We've had projects, we've had networks, we've raised a lot of money, get a lot of engineers, supposedly building stuff. 2019, if you can't launch, if you can't put up, I don't want to hear you talking on stage.
So this is it. Get your product out in 2019.
This is it.
Or get
We're
off
finally
the road.
going to see real projects, real value, real launch. And,
Good, well said.
Yeah, great.
How about it?
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Monica, Dan, and Simon, for being here with us. Let's thank our speakers. Great. So I'm supposed to take you guys to break, but before we do that, I wanted to give you the opportunity to see some of the projects that are going to be out there during this break. So these are projects that are very near and dear to my heart. These are students who are working with the Digital Currency Initiative and with companies who partner with the Digital Currency Initiative to form these projects to get work done over the course of the year. And we are teaching a course called Blockchain Lab here in cooperation between the MIT Media Lab and Sloan. So here are 5 projects, and the students went through quite the process to get selected for this, so they're really excited to present to you on these different projects that they're working on. We have a project around smart contracts for insurance, really looking at how to use oracles. If that's something you don't know about, go find them. Preventing predatory behavior in investing, determining the quality of a cryptocurrency via looking at their source code, blockchain data storage, and blockchain for genetic data transfer and ownership. So please go take a break, learn more about these projects, get some coffee, and we'll see you back here at 11. Thank you.